My name is Wale and I am a literary enthusiast, and today I'm going to be sharing my top reads for the year. This year I read 106 books, which I think is the most I've read in a year. Yeah, I think so. So I've narrowed down my faves under genres, and I think that was the easiest way to organize it in my head personally. So yeah, I'm gonna start with general fiction and then we'll take it from there. First up is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. Now this book I actually read, I started it last New Year's Eve into the new year, and talk about a book to start out with. This book is written from a poet's perspective. So honestly, every single line in here, hits you in the chest. But it's about Cyrus, who is an addict, and he's a recovering addict, and he's kind of battling with what's the meaning of life really, and what is the point of it all. So it does talk about addiction, it talks about mental health and mental illness, and there's like a very interesting plot twist towards the end of the book that some people saw coming, but I didn't, and I just absolutely loved this book. And I also got to see Kaveh in Houston, I think in either January or February of this year, and he was just such a delight. So starting us off strong with Martyr, I absolutely love this book. I recommended it to so many people. It's just so good. Next is one of my favorites. This book is so ridiculous, but funny and sad and heartbreaking, all the things. So this is Pride and Joy by Louisa, onomé. And basically the main character's mom's, I think her 60th birthday is happening. So she rents out this big house for her whole family to come and celebrate her. The mom goes to take a nap and she doesn't wake up, and her sister comes in town and she's like, oh, my sister's not gone. She's gonna rise 3 days from now. Mind you, her birthday was Easter weekend. So it's a very interesting exploration of grief in a way that I didn't anticipate. It's a great exploration of like religion as well, and like believing something so badly and wanting it to be true so badly. It's a really good. I recommend this book to anyone really looking for an interesting story. I just loved it. Next is, Skin and Bones by Renée Watson. This book, oh man, this book is so beautiful. Our main character talks about what it's like to be in a bigger sized body while also raising a child as well. Things are passed down in families, how generational ideas and traumas and beliefs are passed down in regards to, again, body and body image and weight and things like that. It also takes place in Oregon, so there's conversations about gentrification and what it's like to be Black in Oregon. I absolutely love this book. It's so validating for anyone that's been in a bigger size body. It's validating for anyone that's struggling with just being in a body in general, especially as Black women as well too. This book, I've recommended it again to many people throughout the year. It absolutely opened my mind up to so many different things and ideas. So next is Broughtupsy by Christina. This book is a sensory overload. Like the way that this author writes, you can feel, taste, see, and experience everything that they're talking about in the book. And it's a great exploration of identity. The main character is struggling with what it's like to, or how to define home. It's described as diasporic family saga and terse sexual awakening. That's exactly how I would describe it as well too. The main character is queer and she heads back to Jamaica, and she's like there seeing her estranged sister after there's an issue with her brother, and talks about being queer in Jamaica as well too, and the dangers of that. It's written so beautifully. I honestly didn't see that many people talking about this book this year, and it made me so angry because it's such a good book. So definitely recommend this one too. Next is a book that I could not stop thinking about like months after I finished it, and that's Exposure by Ava Delira. It takes place in like a timeline. So we start again a couple of years before, and then it comes into present day. And the main character is working towards being in the film industry in LA. And it's like this dream that he has. And he's working so hard for it. He's like navigated so many different things in regards to, he's a Black man. So race is a big part of his struggles of being able to become successful in LA. And his partner is white. And there's conversation about how it's easier for her than it is for him. And he finally gets to that point where he's successful, and then something that happened in the past comes right back up and just kind of shatters his entire world. This book had me on the edge of my seat. There were so many turning points that like I was truly shocked by. The writing is very engaging. I love we get different POVs from the different characters in the story as well. And again, this is a book that I don't think a lot of people were talking about this year, but I definitely recommend it. It's a great book also for book clubs and just like discussions in general, because there's so many questions about like, what is it like to kind of want something so bad, right? What does that feeling feel like? And then also, what is it like to lose something that you've worked so hard for? Or what is it like to have the thing that you've worked so hard for become like you're in danger of losing it? What does that feel like? So yeah, a great conversation starter for sure. Next is I Hope This Finds You Well by Natalie. I was very shocked that I loved this book. It's like a interesting book of like a workplace. It takes place, the whole book mostly takes place in like a workplace setting, and our main character is kind of like the outcast in her work and nobody really speaks to her. She's a little weird and she stays to herself, but like she has this like one character slash coworker that she hates, right? So instead of like, you know, sharing her hate to anyone in the office, she like writes these like emails out and then like, you know, just like drafts them. She doesn't send them. One day she accidentally sends it. She has a meeting with HR and HR is like, look, you know, we have to monitor your emails now. But the HR guy is new, and what he ends up doing is giving the main character access to everyone's email. So she's now able to kind of see what everyone is saying about her. This book is so good. It's a great exploration of identity and self-esteem and mental health and what it's like to not feel accepted and to be accepted and all of these different things. Again, was shocked by how much I love this book, but it's so good. Next, we have Colored Television by Danzy. This was my first Danzy book. She wrote Caucasia. I'm looking at my wall of books, and another one that I can't remember, but this is a great exploration for mixed race folks and their identity. The main character is so unhinged. Basically, she's a writer and a professor, and like writing isn't going well, so she's like, let me dib and dab in television, and then she's like trying to convince herself that that's the next best step, and she's kind of living a fake life is the best way I can put it in LA in hopes that it leads to success. And wow, she has so much that she has to reckon with in this book. There's also a lot of conversations of what it is like to be someone that's of mixed race identity, and in this case, black and white. Yeah. Love this book. It's so funny. It's kind of ridiculous. And it really just stuck with me. And I was able to see Danzy in Houston. I want to say that was like September or October, and it was fantastic. Next is probably one of the wildest books I've ever read. And this is God Bless You Otis Spunkmeyer by Joseph Earl Thomas. We follow an ex-vet who works at the hospital. He works in the trauma centers in Philadelphia. It's like it's like one of those books where it was almost like I was reading a diary of someone that I don't know. Through the main character's eyes, we're seeing these different characters that are in their life as well too. There's a lot of exploration of trauma. There's a lot of exploration of race. There's a lot of exploration of socioeconomic status, addiction, mental health. It just like, this book is very small, but it covers so much. And the writing is funny, the writing is a little ridiculous, and the writing is also like gut-wrenching. Like there are many parts of this book that had me feeling extremely sad, and there's many parts of this book that had me laughing. I felt like I was on an emotional roller coaster. And again, the writing is so beautiful and also very unique. I don't think I've ever read a book that was written in this way. So for that alone, I have to recommend it. Also, this same author, Joseph Earl Thomas, has a memoir titled Sink, and that memoir also was one of the most unique memoirs I've ever read. Very wild, very crazy. I do recommend it. Next is Blessings by Chukwuebuka Ibeh. This book, so beautiful. It's written in like a heart-wrenching way. We follow the main character who is a teenager who is navigating through being queer and not really sure what that is like in Nigeria, and also trying to hide it and trying to not accept it because it isn't accepted generally. And his parents are questioning the fact that he could be queer, so they send him to a boarding school, and then we see that experience as well too. It's filled with a lot of new experiences for the main character, some great, some very bad. Actually, were there any great experiences? Maybe not. It takes place in a particular time right before same-sex marriage became legal in America, and then also same-sex marriage or just being queer in general became criminalized in Nigeria. So it's very fascinating how the character like comes into his identity of being queer, but then also living in a world that he knows will never be accepting of it, while also trying to find love and feeling like the love that he deserves is not the love that he'll be able to have. It is beautiful. This is a book that I didn't see many people talking about, and it stuck with me for so long. I think this was the author's debut book as well too. I'm not sure, but it's a coming of age book that I would recommend to anyone. Next we have one of my favorite books. This is Tehrangeles by porochista khakpour. First of all, like, look at the cover. It's one of my favorite covers of the year. But we follow an Iranian-American family who kind of feel like the Kardashians in a way, and they're on the brink of getting a reality TV show, and then the pandemic hit. So the book is written from, there's 4 sisters, and we get their POV throughout the book. Their father like came to America and was able to like become a millionaire and very wealthy, and each sister basically has something that they're struggling with. When it comes to identity, there's a sister who struggles with an eating disorder. There's a sister who struggles with overworking out. There's a sister who struggles with depression and anxiety and is chronically online. And this book is, it's a ride. I will from start to finish. I ended up listening to the audio of this book, and the narrator was perfect. Like, she got the like LA girl voice down pat, and there are parts of this book that are also written in Persian in listening to the audio, because I was able to be fully immersed in it, which was so beautiful. I absolutely love this book. I think sometimes when books cover things like disordered eating, it can almost feel maybe glamorized or not really researched well enough. And I think that the author did a fantastic job in their portrayal of disordered eating. And also there's many parts of this book that are like, there's no other way to put it, but like chronically online. The author did a lot of research around that as well too. And she also talked about the very beginning stages of COVID, like things I forgot, like, you know, the clacking of the pans at 7 o'clock for the health workers. I forgot we did that. Or the dance breaks throughout the day. I forgot we did that as well too. The baking, the constant baking. Yeah. So all of that is in this book, and it's like, it's one of those things where like sometimes I feel like it's too early to read books about the pandemic, but because this one covered like the beginning of the pandemic, it was so interesting to like remember all of the things that we were doing in 2020. Anyways, I absolutely adored this book, and I was able to talk to Porochista through Instagram Live over the summer, and it was one of the most fun conversations I've ever had. We talked about everything. We talked about the book, we talked about reality television, we talked about what it's like to be chronically online. It was so fun. I had a great time. And last but not least, for general fiction, we have Victim by Andrew Boryga. This book is an absolute ride. It's a satire. Our main character is, you know, someone that's like kind of coasting in high school, but he does want to go to college. And his advisor is like, I mean, your grades are okay, but you really need to wow them with your essay, right? Your acceptance essay. So he's like, have you ever experienced any like hardships in your life? And he's like, not really. So basically what ends up happening is the advisor is like, oh, you live in the projects and like your dad is a drug dealer. Like, you need to write about that and write about the dangers of that, so that, you know, that can help you put your application, like set it apart from everyone else. He just kind of gives in and does it, and then he gets to college and starts to learn about things like systemic racism and oppression and all of these different things. And then he realizes that he's able to kind of use it to move in the world. It's fascinating. Like, a lot of people would hate the main character, but I kind of loved him. I don't know what that says about me. If you're utilizing these things in a negative way, it's gonna come back. Like, you're not gonna get away with that. Highly recommend. That's all I have for general fiction, and now I'm going to move on to my favorite genre, which is romance. I read quite a few romances this year. I love romance. First on my list is Curvy Girl Summer by Danielle Allen. I loved this book. I listened to the audio, and I think that just made the experience so much better. Anywho, the main character is about to turn 30, and her family's like, you need to lose weight so that you can find a man, and if you find a man, you'll inherit this like boat, this family boat. It's problematic, I know. So then she's like, you know what, fine, like I'll get on the scene, I'll start dating. She sets up a dating profile, and she starts going to this bar and by her house, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna meet the dates here. Just, you know, I'm close to my house, it's safe, whatever. She ends up sparking a friendship with the bartender, and they have so much banter. Like, it's like the type of banter that you're like, oh my gosh, should I be here right now? It was funny, it was witty, it was flirty. However, the bartender's wearing a wedding ring, and I'll leave it at that. Absolutely adored this book. When it comes to like spiciness, there's I think only 2 or 3 scenes that are spicy in this book, but it didn't really need it because, again, the banter really held. When it comes to like banter between main characters, I would say this is the one book that I'm like, I would always recommend for banter. Like, no notes, beautiful. Next is A Love Like the Sun by Rhys M. Neilson. I absolutely adored this book. Personally, I know a lot of people aren't a fan of this, but I am a fan of Friends to Lovers. To me, it just feels more realistic, and we kind of skip the like getting to like build a relationship phase in that way because they already have a friendship. And for me, I love when romance is like focused on the friendship piece before the romance, and this book was a really great example of that. The main character and like her best friend, like there's banter there. He's obviously so in love with her, but she's like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to take it there, I don't want to take it there. And of course it builds into a very beautiful relationship. But while she's trying to navigate what's going on between her and her friend, she's also struggling with medical negligence. She's experiencing a lot of pain, and the doctors keep telling her it's in her head, it's in her head, it's in her head, until it becomes very serious. And I think that that representation was really important because that is an experience that many people, especially Black women, have in this country. So I really, really loved that that was like not a side part of the story, but a main part of the story as well. This was one of my favorite books. Lots of spicy scenes in this book though, I will say. A lot. There's a particular dance scene that happens between the main character and her best friend, and it was one of those dance scenes that I was imagining, like, you know, like when you're like at a club or at a party and you see like a couple in the corner where it's like they're dancing as if nobody else is there. That happened in this book, and it was really beautiful to read. So I recommend this one for sure. Next is another book that shocked me. This is Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty Greenwood. This book was, the premise of it is what drew me in, and then it ended up being so much more than the premise. Oh my goodness. So the main character, she doesn't really do much. She works across from her apartment, and she comes home, she eats a TV dinner, she watches a show, she goes to bed, she does the same thing every day. She doesn't really have any friends, she doesn't really like live with any family, and that's that. One day she comes back home, she's doing her routine, she eats like a frozen sandwich, I think, and she chokes on it and dies. I know, she dies, but nobody's there to witness her die because she lives by herself. So she wakes up in the afterlife and she meets her afterlife liaison, and the funniest moment of this whole interaction is that the liaison made her watch a movie of her life, which sounds terrifying if you ask me. While she's like, the liaison's basically trying to like welcome her into the afterlife, she ends up meeting this man in the waiting room of the afterlife, and they like, it was like love at first sight. She's like, oh my gosh, I've never felt this way about someone before. And then all of a sudden he disappears, and she's looking at the liaison like, I'm sorry, where did that man go? And it turns out he was under anesthesia, so he wasn't actually fully dead. The liaison's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna try to see if I can break the rules, and if you can find this guy on Earth again under a certain amount of time, I don't remember how long she gave her. If you can find him, you get to live. But if you don't find him, you gotta come back up here with me, and that's that. So like, that's like the very small premise of the story. It ends up being so much more, and like an exploration of like how we're spending our time on Earth and like what it's like to truly live. I loved it. That's all I'll say about it. I absolutely adored this book. Next we have Only for the Week by Natasha Bishop. This is the new cover. It was re-released with Zando, which is an imprint. So at first it was self-published, and then it did so well that it was then re-released through an imprint. But Only for the Week, such a beautiful book. I don't know. Again, when we're talking spicy, this I think might be one of the spiciest books I've ever read. I don't know. Basically, our main character's sister is getting married in Tulum, but she's getting married to our main character's ex-boyfriend. And the ex-boyfriend has a friend that has always had a crush on her. So when they get to Tulum, he's like, how about you just give me all your yeses for the week? And that's that. That's what happened. She gave him all her yeses, and he took care of her while she took care of her sister. And her sister is acting insane throughout this entire wedding process. I actually hated the sister for most of the book, but I absolutely adored this book. It's a very much so if he wanted to, he will type of book. The romance, 10 out of 10. Conversations that they had between each other was beautiful. There's another dance floor scene in this book that is very different from the one that I described earlier. I'll leave it at that. So I definitely recommend this one as well. Next are I think this might be my favorite romance book of all time. I think I feel solid in saying that. And that book is Real by Kennedy Ryan. This is the new cover. There's so many covers to this book at this point. This book is so beautiful. If I can recommend any audiobook to you, it's this one, because the narrators are perfect for the characters. Beautiful music. They're they're singing. It's a full production and it's amazing. Our main character is navigating through lupus. She's always wanted to be an actress, and she ends up meeting this man who's putting on this particular movie, and he like was able to witness her performance and was like, that's the person I want to act in this movie. So we get to learn a lot about Black Hollywood as well too, but the love story between the two of them was just so beautiful. I think the author, Kennedy Ryan, who I love, she does a great job at researching the things that she's talking about in the books, and it always shows. I think people that have never struggled with a chronic illness don't understand what it's like to share that part with someone that you're in a romantic relationship with. It can be very vulnerable, and I think that Kennedy handled that situation so well. The love between the two characters is just so believable. It's so real, it's tangible, you can feel it. Yeah, this book brought me to tears many times, I can't even lie. I have 3 copies of this book with different covers. I'm very serious about it. So again, I will say this is the most romantic book I've ever read in my life. And last but not least, another Kennedy Ryan book. Can we see a theme here? This Could Be Us, and it's the second book in the Skyland series. And the Skyland series starts with Before I Let Go, which is another one of my favorite romance books of all time. But This Could Be Us was different, like in a way that I didn't anticipate. The main character actually goes through a self-love journey before allowing a romantic love to come in the mix. And to me, it made the love between her and the person that she ends up with even more beautiful, because she was fully in love with herself and he was just an addition instead of a replacement. Because the book starts off with her experiencing betrayal in her marriage, and then everything that came with that. I'll leave it at that because there are plot twists in that. But yeah, again, one of my favorite books. It's beautiful. The 3rd book in the Skyland series comes out next year, and I'm so excited. Like when it drops, I'm not reading anything else. Like that's it. So yes, this is the last romance book that I would say is my fave of the year. Next, I want to go into, I didn't read that much speculative fiction this year, but I did read 2 that I loved. So the first one is This Great Hemisphere by Matteo Escarapore. It's our world, of course, but many, many years later, and there's people called the Invisibles and the dominant population. He doesn't actually name like the race that's attached to these people, but like you kind of understand what's happening. But Sweetmint is our main character, and her brother is missing, and she's trying to find him. And in her attempt to trying to find him, she starts to recognize so much about the world of the dominant population, also called the DPs. It explores so many different things I didn't anticipate. Things like, you know, injustices with insurance, how invisible people are treated by dominant population. There's many questions about identity as well too. This book, I mean, it's truly a ride. And what I loved about it is that the author was able to build this world in a way that was relatable to the world we live in now, but also still like an escape, if that makes sense. There's a really big election that happens at the end of this book, which was like kind of coinciding with the time of the election in in the world that we live in right now, like currently. I found that to be so interesting because a lot of the things and like the injustices that happen with the election in the book are also things that we've seen and heard in real time. So I absolutely loved this book. I think it was written incredibly well. I personally would love a part 2. I don't know if that's possible, but I always recommend this one as well too. And then we have probably one of the most interesting speculative fiction books I've ever read. This is Sky Full of Elephants by Sibo Campbell. And basically what happens is the main character is in jail, and then all of a sudden all the white people in the country walk into large bodies of water and are no more. And it's asking us like, what is it like to be Black in a world without white people? And we follow the main character as he's trying to navigate identity now that he's been released from jail, pretty much because nobody's watching the jails anymore. And he gets in contact with his estranged daughter who is biracial. And she's like, I need you to help me find other members of my family. Like, I think that there's still some in Alabama, so you need to take me there, basically. And we're kind of looking at their dynamic because they've never met before, they've never had a conversation before, and now they're meeting under these circumstances where his daughter basically watched her entire family, which is the white side of the family, walk into a body of water and die. So it explores so many different things, and to me it was a really great exploration of identity specifically, but I think it's also a great conversation starter in like how we as people, or as Black people in general, can really focus on community and start to provide for ourselves, especially in the world that we live in now. And I think that both of these books explore that, and And I think to me, that's the beauty of speculative fiction, because it creates a space where we as people can be creative on how we look at the world that we live in right now and want better for ourselves or want more for ourselves. So I'm a huge fan of speculative fiction, and I read both of these books and was able to also host a panel with both of these authors at Texas Book Fest this year. And it was amazing. It's one of those things where you kind of had to be there, but being in conversation with them was the highlight of my year. And they just left me, and I'm sure everyone else that was there or read the book, feeling so encouraged and a little bit more hopeful for the future. Next, I want to just quickly talk about my poetry and short story collections that I read this year. I've been trying to read more poetry because I think poetry is important. To me as a reader, poetry just like is able to write about things in ways that always help me to think a little bit bigger or think a little bit more outside of the norm of how I view myself in the world that I live in. So poetry is a really great avenue for that. First, we have Black Girl You Are Atlas by Renée Watson again. This is a Renée Watson fan account. I love her writing so much, and this book is one that I actually gifted to many of the little Black girls that are in my life, because I think it's validating of our experiences as Black girls in the world. It's also filled with hope. It's filled with advice. It's filled with affirmation and encouragement. I love this book. And in Black Girl You Are Atlas, there's also a lot of illustrations in it as well too, and that to me just makes it even more special. This is one of those books that like I hope to pass down at some point and continue to gift to many people because it is just so beautiful. Next, we have Bluff by Danae Smith, who I was also able to see here in Houston a couple of months ago. And to me, it's like this poetry collection is filled with all of the rage that I personally feel when it comes to the world that we live in regards to just like how everyone is just kind of navigating through a very difficult time, whether it's COVID, long COVID, the government, and like all of these different things. I felt like Danae was able to put into words some of that rage that I experienced, that many of us experience when it comes to the world that we live in right now. And sometimes I think we need to read books that fuel that rage so that we can feel encouraged to continue to pursue change. Next up, we have Woke Up No Light by Leila Mottley, another book that was validating as a Black woman in many different ways, but also kind of fueled that rage that I was talking about earlier. And maybe that's what poetry does for me. It gives me the language and helps me to stay motivated to continue to do the work as a community member in the world that we live in. Next up, we have Bright Red Fruit by Safia elhillo. This book absolutely wrecked me, and I was too stunned to speak when I closed it. It's written in verse, and it's a young adult book, but we follow the main character, you know, who is a teenager and is so desperate to feel like an adult, right? And when you want to feel like an adult, like you know what you're doing, you do things that tend to be a little bit dangerous. Anyways, our main character, of course, meets a man online, and she's so convinced that she knows exactly who he is, and you know how that story goes. But because you know how that story goes, it made the journey a little bit harder to read, because it's like you want to protect the main character. You want to be like, no. But, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, maybe this is something that she has to go through in order to learn. So I'm like remembering the book and like feeling emotional again. Like this book was so heartbreaking, but also beautiful in a way that I think many books that are written in verse are. What I really enjoyed about this book was that, like, you know, as a teen, her and her mom, of course, are like butting heads. It's very much so she doesn't get it. She's too strict. You know, we all know what that is. However, there's a part at the end of this book where the mom and the daughter have a moment of understanding with each other and apologies were given. What stood out to me the most about that moment is that a lot of people will read that and feel validated in their own experiences because they may have never been able to receive that apology from their mom, or they may have never been able to receive that understanding from their mom. So this book, yeah, you gotta read it. And last but not least, we have Ghost Roots by Femi Aguda. It's a book of short stories, so fascinating. All of the stories take place in Nigeria, and they kind of explore different cultural aspects of what it's like to be Nigerian. And I, for one, as someone that is Nigerian American, really enjoyed that. I really connected to a lot of the stories. It felt like I was reading many parts of my culture through these different characters throughout the stories. Mind you, some of these stories are a little bit spooky is the best way I can describe it. In this collection, if I'm remembering correctly, there's a story called Breast Milk that I really enjoyed. I think there's another one titled If I Were to Carry You, Girly. It's a fantastic story collection. Again, like, this is pretty spooky, but I really enjoyed the cultural exploration as well too, of just the little like folk tales that I've heard as a Nigerian person throughout my life kind of woven into these stories was really validating and like just really nice to see in print, I think. Next we have my favorite genre, which people argue is not a genre, but just an age range, but for the sake of this I'll say genre, which is YA, young adult. First we have Thirsty by Jazz Hammonds. Absolutely adored this book. When Jazz put out that like arcs were available, I was like, please, I would like one. And they were able to send me one, and it was fantastic to be able to read it ahead of time. But our main character is trying to get into this like girl secret society that will help her to be successful in the future, but she's also navigating through alcoholism. And alcoholism in teenagers is something that is not discussed nearly enough. I do think it's a very real thing. And to have that be explored in this book, which is like a novel, but I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of young adults or even adults could relate to it, was really, really important, I think. I think to me, this is one of the most important books when we're talking about addiction, because we're watching the main character come to the realization like, oh, maybe I do have a problem, but then also feeling like, aren't I too young to have a problem? It's fantastic. The writing is really beautiful. It's very engaging. I think I finished this book in one day. Needless to say, I loved it. Next we have 24 Seconds From Now by Jason Reynolds. It's very rare to see a love story from the man's perspective or the boy's perspective, and that's what we got in this book. Our main character and his girlfriend, they're about to do the do for the first time, and he's basically going around asking advice from the people in his life that he trusts and loves. And it's so fascinating to hear all the different things that they talk to him about love, and you know what it's like to experience the first time and what intimacy is actually, and ways of being respectful and open to the experience. I loved it. I thought it was so beautiful. I feel like, again, this is a book that every teenager should read. I love it. And I love Jason Reynolds in general. His writing is always one that sticks. And last but not least, for the young adult section, we have Not About a Boy by Myah, Hollis. This book is heartbreaking, but important. Our main character is just literally just going through so much. She's a teenager. Her boyfriend just died from drug use. She is also navigating through addiction. She's struggling with persistent depression. She just found out that she has a twin sister because she's adopted. So she's a transracial adoptee as well too. So her parents are white and she's black. There's a lot that happens to my girl in this book. However, I feel like it's another book that I feel like is very important, especially for teenagers and adults. Anyone that has ever navigated through a persistent mental illness will feel very validated by this book. I underlined so many different moments throughout it because it's written in a way that is raw. Like, I think sometimes when people are talking about depression or mental illness, they don't want to focus on the ugly parts of it, but this book did not shy away from that. And I feel like that's very important, especially for those that might feel shame surrounding the ugly parts of their mental illness. And I do feel like in seeing that in this book, it can be very validating in ways that people may have not even been able to experience before. So absolutely love this book. And last but not least, I am someone that very much so enjoys memoirs. And two of the memoirs that stuck out to me this year, one of them is First in the Family by Jessica Hoppe. She is an addict and she's talking about what it's like to be an addict in her family who also struggles with addiction, but due to culture may not see it as addiction. And then the conversation then shifts into what does the conversations around addiction in our country specifically or in the world even look like. I listened to this one on audio and it's read by the author, and to me that was such like a special experience because again, she's not shying away from the ugly parts of addiction. She's not shying away any of the stigmas attached to addiction as well. She's very raw, honest, straight to the point. And I, for one, really love that because I do think, again, when we're talking about addiction, there can be like certain parts of the conversation that we don't don't focus on, and that's not the case in this memoir. So I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's an important book. I think it's an important book for everyone, especially in the world we're living in now, where a lot of people are struggling with addiction, but may feel afraid to say that. First in the Family, it's a good one. And last but not least, I have already talked about this book, but I'm gonna talk about it again. This is Gather Me by Glory Edom, who is also at Well Read Black Girl on Instagram. As someone who is first generation Nigerian American, this book was particularly for me. I will say, like, obviously she didn't write the book for me, but I have never read a book where I've seen so many parts of myself throughout the writing before. And that at times was jarring. It was validating. It was confronting. Yeah, I've recommended this book countless times. I think about it often. It's one of those books that I will return to in a couple of months when I'm maybe remembering it or experiencing something that's similar to what Glory experienced in her book as well too. I can't recommend it enough. I can't. It's simply one of those books for me that, you know, when people are like, oh, what are your all-time favorites? This is one of them. I would even say top 5. Well, if you've made it to the end of this video, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to yap about the books that have honestly made me a different and better person throughout this year. I read a lot more than I anticipated I was going to read, and each one of these books and remembering how I felt and what I was experiencing throughout the year while reading them was so special. Something about the books I read this year felt very, very, very like particular to each moment of my life throughout the year. I'm not sure what that's about. I will be thinking a little bit more about that, but if you and I shared any of similar feelings about any of the books I talked about in this video, please let me know in the comments. I love talking about books, as you can see, and I want to continue to share and talk more with you guys in the comments. So thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.